The purpose of these forums is to reach out to the community about the important issue of water. And as you will learn from our presenter, Blake Ellis, in 2014, the state adopted the Sustainable Groundwater Act, or SGMA, which required all water basins that use groundwater to have a plan to ensure that their basin is managed in a sustainable manner. SGMA requires that the needs of all stakeholders are taken into account, and that would include agriculture, bless you, the environment, urban dwellers, domestic well owners. I think there's quite a few of you here today about that, I know. Native tribes, the groundwater-dependent ecosystems, or GDEs as they're called, and that no one stakeholder should supersede the needs of another. And so we want to make sure that our Vina Sub-Basin Plan and those of the basins in our neighborhood do that. We want to educate the public on SGMA and its many confusing acronyms and the different strategies that are employed to preserve our groundwater levels, such as things like recharge and conjunctive use and surface water and minimum threshold. The acronyms go on and on. And this will allow you, the public, to be part of the conversation, able to offer ideas and feedback based on facts to the Vina Board, the Vina GSA Board in their meetings, and the Butte County Department of Water Resources. Should I?
Sorry,
okay.
Susan.
Ooh. And it's our experience that domestic well owners, bless their little hearts, and the environment throughout the state get the least consideration when it comes to planning. And as a domestic well owner, I know we are not organized, and many aren't even aware of all the issues at hand. So the first round of grant money is coming to a close, and preparations for the second grant applications are due in 2017. And we will be sharing what has been accomplished so far with several feasibility studies, and hope that many of you will join in the conversation about the decisions concerning the health of our Vina Sub-Basin for the next 5 years when they write a new grant. And so that's why we are glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over. Oh, actually, I'm going to introduce all the speakers. Oh, okay. It's quite an illustrious group, I got to tell you. All right. So Jim Brobeck, right here in the front row. For the past 16 years, he's been a water policy analyst for Aqua Alliance, a nonprofit NGO formed to challenge threats to the hydraulic health of northern Sacramento Valley aquifers. And in 2011, he was appointed by Supervisor Yamaguchi to serve on the Butte County Water Advisory Committee. Jim represented which is a sub-basin designation under the California Sustainable Groundwater Act. And then we have Cheetah Tchudi. Where's Cheetah? Right in the back, looking dapper as always. Hey there. Okay, he's a farmer and a consultant that has been working in the fields of agronomy, conservation ecology, and mycology for over 20 years. He works as groundwater community engagement contractor for the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, educating growers about local SGMA implementation and providing irrigation and well technical assistance. Marty Dunlap, where are you? Oh, there she is in the very back. Is a public interest attorney who has lived in this region for over 50 years. She had been attending to water issues of the North State since 2003. She chaired a group entitled Citizens Water Watch of Northern California and has represented the public interest while serving on the Lower Tuscan Coordinating Group orchestrated by NCWA. Is that the Water Watch? NACWA, okay. Right there, the Northern California Water Association, and on the Cal Water Citizen Advisory Committee. Todd Green, right here in the front, he received his BS in Earth Sciences at the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1994, followed by a PhD in geology at Stanford University in 2000. After a 6-year period of working as a petroleum geologist, Todd has been teaching geology at Chico State since 2007 in the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department. Todd's broad areas of research interests include tectonics and sedimentation. Sigma mandates each groundwater basin has a strong understanding of how the aquifer is structured in order to effectively manage groundwater use. Fortunately, the main aquifer underlying Chico, also known as the Tuscan Formation, is exposed as outcrops in the cliffs of Upper Bidwell Park. Cliffs and the surrounding canyons providing a perfect marriage of a strong geological interest with a societal need. Blake Ellis, that's right, received her master's in social work from Chico State, and for the past decade, Blake has been working at the intersection of human and environmental health. She has taught outdoor and garden education, provided horticultural therapy to adults with developmental disabilities, and now provides nature-based mental health therapies to individuals impacted by catastrophic wildfire. Blake is a Type 2 wildland firefighter and passionate about stewarding local landscapes. She is a domestic well owner and an avid gardener and an outdoor enthusiast who is proud to protect the place we are lucky enough to call home. And I am Susan Schrader. I am also a presenter. And I am a domestic well owner. I have no background in water. I came to it because I have a well, and then we had the drought, and then I got really worried, and then I started talking to people, and I said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to us? But then I hooked up with groundwater for Butte, and that was during the time the Tuscan Water District was being, established, and our group tried to get it not to be established, but it got established. But anyway, and so I've just kept on with learning more and more about water, and here I am today. So anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, right? Blake Ellis.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all here tonight. So I'll just premise this with all of this information is probably going to feel overwhelming, so I wanted to just start with the basics, some groundwater 101. So what is groundwater? Simply put, it is water stored beneath the Earth's surface that forms underground reservoirs called aquifers. A groundwater basin consists of one or more connected aquifers that are contained within naturally defined boundaries. And subbasins are smaller sections of groundwater basins that are divided by geologic, hydrologic, or even political boundaries. I wanted to show you some visual aids here just to give a little bit of context, some very simple, oversimplified visual aids. But in the interest in time, I'm going to keep on moving us through. So, what is SGMA? What is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? The reason we're all here today. So in 2014, California law it's a California law with the stated intention of halting the unsustainable use of groundwater and bringing groundwater basins into balanced levels of pumping and recharge. For the past 100 years, groundwater pumping has been greater than what naturally replenishes, which is no surprise since before SGMA, there were virtually no groundwater use regulations. Now, SGMA's stated goals are sustainability and local control, which has led to the creation of hundreds of local groundwater sustainability agencies tasked with developing groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs. These plans describe their path for reaching groundwater sustainability by 2040. Unfortunately, many groundwater sustainability agencies have been dominated by historic powers in the region, and the implementation of many plans as currently developed would favor those with the strongest voices, the most money, and the most political power. So why protect groundwater? Why does this matter? Well, for the first part, it makes up 60% of the state's water supply in dry years and 40% even in wet years. Approximately 33 million Californians rely on groundwater either for drinking or for household uses. And then, of course, there's our beloved groundwater-dependent ecosystems, or GDEs, which consists of our beloved streams and creeks, rivers, and wetlands. And there are even conservative estimates that suspect that at least 1,500 species of plants and animals in California depend on groundwater to survive. There's also agriculture, which we all rely on to keep us fed. However, agriculture currently uses 80% of the developed water in California and contributes about 2.5% of the state GDP. Most of California's developed water is transported via the State Water Project and the Federal Central Valley Project. In an average year, the Central Valley Project delivers about 7 million acre-feet to Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley cropland. For context, though, 8 million acre-feet is enough to serve all other water users in the state, which include household, industrial, and commercial uses, for 5 years. Not talking about, when I'm talking about agriculture, though, I want to be clear that I'm not talking about small farmers. I'm talking about industrial agriculture, corporate giants, and investment firms. And within the Vina Subbasin, we found that less than 4% of landowners own 43% of the land. And in fact, one of the largest landowners is the Mormon Church, headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. And these giants are the biggest groundwater users within the state. So what are groundwater sustainability agencies? Well, they're formed by local public agencies, such as water districts, cities, and counties, to manage high and medium priority basins. In order for them to form, they have to address a few items. First, they need to do research and understand the basin setting. They need to inventory existing monitoring programs at these individual ground monitoring sites, like monitoring wells, and set minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, which I'll get to in a moment. And they must engage interested parties within the subbasin or within the basin, and then create a groundwater sustainability plan. So groundwater sustainability plan are local plans that outline how an area will achieve long-term groundwater sustainability. They set clear, measurable standards, including what counts as an undesirable result, the minimum groundwater levels that must be maintained, and the goals that the basin aims to reach. If undesirable results occur, they must be corrected through specific projects and management actions. And progress must be shown using real data. The groundwater sustainability agencies then set sustainability management criteria. This consists of 1, minimum thresholds, or MTs. This is a set number that shows the lowest acceptable groundwater condition at a monitoring site. If groundwater levels go past this point, it could lead to serious problems in the basin. Then there's measurable objectives. Which is a quantifiable goal for maintenance or improvement of groundwater conditions. This is the groundwater level they're aiming to achieve. This is the goal. There are beneficial users, which include agriculture users, domestic well owners, municipal operators, etc., including tribes, disadvantaged communities, and environmental users. Under SGMA, groundwater sustainability agencies are required to prevent adverse impacts to beneficial users when establishing this criteria. So what are these undesirable results we're talking about? Well, SGMA defines sustainable groundwater management as using and managing groundwater in a way that can continue long-term without causing these undesirable results. The 6 undesirable results are lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of groundwater storage capacity within aquifers, seawater intrusion, water quality degradation, land subsidence, and depletion of interconnected surface water. So I wanted to demonstrate what these items mean by just showing you a hydrograph. I chose this monitoring well because it's actually really close to my home. I happen to have one valley oak in my yard, as well as non-native trees, and so I also am on well. So this feels hit really close to home for me. So as you can see, the top line is the ground surface elevation, essentially the ground. The measurable objective, meaning our healthy and sustainable goal, is the green line. As you'll see, the blue on this graph is water levels over time. So as you can see, where the measurable objective is set, our current goal for our plan is set at or below historic groundwater lows. The minimum threshold is set at 110 feet. So if you look at this graph, you can tell that my non-native trees, my other trees in my yard, are not going to be okay. And if it reaches the minimum threshold or anywhere near it, my well's not going to be okay. I chose another site, which I just want to quickly touch on. The valley oak tree has the deepest taproot of all trees in our area, and it is a keystone species. As you can see, the measurable objective barely reaches past the depth of the valley oak tree. And a lot of wells are going to be struggling as well, and those wells are privately owned and located in disadvantaged rural communities. And this could lead to increased drinking water pollutants. And there's currently no mitigation plan in place for domestic well users should their well run dry. There's also no mitigation plan for tree mortality and stress, increased fire risk of dried fuels, potential land subsidence, infrastructure repair, asset devaluation, and increased liability. We know what happens in dry seasons in a wind event. Those limbs drop. They fall somewhere. So, Sigma requires GSAs to engage interested parties known as beneficial users or stakeholders within their development of groundwater sustainability plans and management products. To their credit, Sigma Review website gives VINA GSA a score of high integration of stakeholder involvement on committees and boards. However, research evaluating 108 GSPs found that the majority of GSPs do not integrate or protect the majority of their stakeholders. However, when plans do integrate diverse stakeholders into their planning and decision-making process, wouldn't you know it, they're more likely to be protected and have better outcomes. Agriculture users have the highest level of protection among stakeholder groups, and without the ability to form a governing body to represent their interests, the most straightforward route for domestic and environmental stakeholders to influence decision-making process is to be appointed stakeholder seats on governing boards. So I'll quickly talk about GDEs, though I highly encourage you to attend our next forum because we're going to dive into this a lot deeper. But groundwater-dependent ecosystems are another beneficial user, and they are comprised of species and habitats that rely on groundwater. California defines this as ecological communities or species that depend on groundwater emerging from aquifers or groundwater occurring near ground surface. So findings from the Groundwater Leadership Forum review of draft and final groundwater sustainability plans required under Sigma. These research findings published in Nature Communications found that only 0.2% of ecosystem acres are protected by the VINA's GSP. 0.2%. So this is kind of par for the course, unfortunately. 91% of groundwater-dependent ecosystems are unprotected under the current plans submitted by GSEs across the state of California. 60% of agriculture wells are unprotected, and 63% of domestic wells are unprotected. Like I said, there's no mitigation plan in place for this, and right now, especially when it comes to GDEs, more than 90% of California's river streams and wetlands and other ecosystems that rely on groundwater have already been damaged or destroyed by land use changes and water management. The limited habitat that remains is increasingly unsustainable or at risk from unsustainable groundwater use. So reducing groundwater use is key to bringing basins back into balance, yet very few plans describe the need for pumping cuts, fees, and other demand reduction techniques, which we will focus also on our next forum. So please join us next time to talk about demand reduction. And with that, I apologize for going over time. Thank you. Todd Green, you're up.
Second to breathe there. Thank you, Blake. That was an excellent presentation. A lot of information there. One of the things that Blake talked about was the basin setting, and that's what I wanted to touch on, especially since Butte County has three subbasins underneath Butte County. That's the Vina subbasin, the Butte subbasin, and the Wyandotte Creek subbasin. And so I want to touch on some of the basin setting characteristics of each. There's varying amounts of knowledge and data between the three of those, but I'll show some some data, some cross sections, some hydrographs, and thankfully Blake introduced us to those from each of those, or at least two of those subbasins for sure. So Blake talked about this in the aquifer dynamics of these alluvial systems, and that's what we're mainly dealing with. That's what Sigma basically is talking about when we look at the Sacramento Valley, is these alluvial systems. And they're complex, and as you could, I don't know if you could see can you see no, any pointer? Is there a point? I guess not a pointer. Well, as you can see in the circle there's a representation of how the different types of materials are interbedded or interfinger underneath an alluvial aquifer. The blue would represent something that's off to the bottom right, where water is moving through pore spaces separated by grains. That's more indicative of what's in the blue, as you can see by the arrows, and they're moving. There's other types of aquifers, such as fractured aquifers, that are more here on the left, that Sigma isn't really concerned with right now. But it's more of these alluvial aquifers here. Now, trying to track these in 3 dimensions is not easy. As you can see, here's a block diagram of what some of these coarser materials, which have most of the groundwater in them, are probably structured like in 3 dimensions. Lots of branching, lots of spaghetti strands, if you will, in 3 dimensions that are cross-cutting each other. These are complex systems that were mainly deposited by river systems when they were active. So a complex system, not to say the least. So I mentioned the aquifer systems in the 3 subbasins, the Vina, the Butte, and the Wyandotte Creek. And I'll talk about the Vina first, and then we'll jump to Wyandotte Creek, and then Butte after that. And then I'll mention some names here, which are basically geologic formation names, whereas and you'll see that the Vina has its own, the Wyandotte Creek has its own, and Butte subbasin is a combination of both of those. This is a map that was published a while ago, almost 10 years ago, showing now we'll focus on the Vina, but the outcrop distribution and the subsurface distribution of the Tuscan Formation on the east side of the basin, and the Tehama Formation on the west side of the basin. So there's outcrops, and then there's subsurface distribution. And then what we'll also talk about down here in the Wyandotte Creek is another formation called the Laguna Formation and the Merton Formation, which are down here. So we'll come back to those. This was a DWR cross-section that took us through Chico and across over to the Coast Ranges. And you can see 1,000 feet there for scale, and the vertical scale. And there's this red and this tan are the main players here. And the red is the Tuscan Formation coming off of the Cascades, and the yellow here, or tan, is the Tehama Formation coming off the Coast Ranges. And there's quite a bit of intermixing in the middle of the basin. And trying to define that intermixing is challenging without good well data. It's one of the things that we're trying to understand better. But they do meet in the middle, so to speak, around the Sacramento River. And this just blows it up if you had trouble seeing that last one. So again, the red is heading down. About a foot a year, but it all depends. That's a very much of an average. Okay, so I just want to, we'll end with Wyandotte Creek and Butte. As we move over to Wyandotte Creek, so now we're over here. This is a very different beast. We're very close to the foothills, and we're dealing with different formations. So we have a strong, this is a cross section here. It goes from A to A prime. So this is, that green is Wyandotte Creek. So that green outline is that purple right there. And you can see the cross section here. Here's feet and elevation. And there's meters, so like about 5 kilometers from there to there. And it's very different. We're dealing a lot with what's known as the Laguna Formation, which has formed lots of valleys and cutting valleys and filled in with more sediment. And they cut valleys and fill. It's a lot of cut and fill of the Laguna Formation, which is happening here. And we'll see later in the Butte, a lot of those valleys that were the freeway for Laguna Formation were sending a lot of that sediment into the southern Butte Basin. So it's kind of like the beginnings of the Laguna Formation before it went off into the basin, into the Butte subbasin. And then below that, the Merton's pretty similar. It's just a lot more volcanic in nature, but harder to image out here. And below that is what's known as the Ione Formation, which has some water quality issues once you get down to below what's known as the Ione Formation. So there's less information known about the Wyandotte Creek, less wells, less AEM data, but that's generally the feel for what's happening in the Wyandotte Creek subbasin. So again, you're closer to bedrock. You got a lot of these valley fills, but you do have much less data than the other basins to really constrain that. Okay, finally, the Butte subbasin. This outline in gray is the Butte subbasin. So Chico's up here. The way I looked at the Butte subbasin, you look at all these black lines, those are the AEM lines done from the statewide survey, and all these red dots represent different wells that you can use to constrain this. And down here is the Sutter Buttes. And if we look at a cross-section from A to A prime, so that's A to B, so it's a south to north, here's south to north. Each one of these lines there is 100 feet. And there's meters, so you're looking at all across the Butte subbasin. You could basically break this out into 3 different areas. From the south, you have this, what's known as the rampart. It's basically debris that came off the Sutter Buttes. So here's the Sutter Buttes here. You can see the topography, all this really bright colored, high resistivity stuff. That's the debris coming off of the Sutter Buttes, heading to the north. That's known as the rampart, and it contains lots of pore space for water. And then as we move to the north, then I kind of divided this into what's known as the southern and the northern Butte Basin. In the southern area, it's Laguna. Here's Wyandotte Creek out in here. So remember, we're shedding off debris. The lagunas, there's all the valley fill, cut and fill. All that debris goes into the southern Butte Basin. So that's dominated by the Laguna, as you can see. But as we go to the northern part of the Butte Basin, now we intersect what we know about the Vina. And this is our friend, the Lower Tuscan, and then the UTT 2 and 1 and the Quaternary over here. So that's the Tuscan aquifer system. So the Butte subbasin is big and it's deep, deeper aquifers, and it's definitely different from the south, moving up to the north. And I think I'll end with here, for example, now here's another south to north cross section on the western side of the Butte subbasin. So there it is. There's south. There's north. And here's a deep well that has a screen deeper than the rampart. So it's underneath the Sutter Butte stuff. And then we got a really shallow in that little bright zone there. And you can see and so the deeper one is in red. The shallower ones in purple, and they generally track each other and come up to the same elevations. So I would say they're pretty much behaving the same way through time, and that's a pretty different. There's hundreds and hundreds of feet that separate those screens. So this zone in the AEM, that turquoise zone, and then even below this turquoise zone, seem to be behaving in the same way. And then finally, I'll say in the Butte subbasin, here's the Lower Tuscan up here. It does not, and you can see that by these bright green, does not seem to persist in the southern part of the Butte subbasin. So again, a difference between the northern and the southern portions of the Butte subbasin. So hopefully I didn't go over my time, but I think I have fun talking about that. And from there, we'll head to Cheetah. Thank you.
Yeah, can I? Is that okay? Okay, so we've seriously dropped in the deep end. And so I think for my part, this works out that I can provide some kind of review for some of the key terminology that circles around Sigma. Something I like to say is you can't say any one thing about Sigma. You kind of have to dance between concepts. You have to spatially like zoom out and zoom back in. And so hopefully this will provide some sort of review and help cement some of that terminology so that you can kind of come forward informed, and when the terminology and all these acronyms get thrown at you, you kind of have some grounding for it. So yeah, consider this your intermission. So this is another DWR graphic. It's not simplified, but it's about as simple as it can get. So as Todd was explaining, we have supersurface, subsurface water coming into the system. Some of it infiltrates and percolates, becomes part of potentially the lower aquifer. Some of this precipitation returns to the air as evaporation. Some of it gets transpired through plants. So we have this terminology evapotranspiration. That's the rate at which this water leaves the surface of the soil. And then we have groundwater pumping. So this can happen from different levels in that system. So if we're pumping from deep aquifer, or if we're pumping from the upper system, some of these sweet alluvial soils that we have here. And then some of it will pass through the system. It'll progress down, it will go to our neighbors, it will return to the Sacramento River, all sorts of things. So I'm gonna kind of go back to what's going on in Butte County and what we're surrounded by. So we're broken up into these basins. Up and down California, they're broken into these high, medium, and low priority basins. Low priority basins don't need to create GSAs and GSPs. Again, this is Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which is responsibility for developing the groundwater sustainability plan that we implement to helpfully counteract overdraft, which is when we pump more water than we are getting back into the system. And so here in Butte County, we're broken up into the three GSAs. Or no, rather, three subbasins. So the Vina subbasin, where we are now, it goes up to just about before Vina itself, down into the valley. It cuts off on the east side, right around Butte College, and then extends out to the Sacramento River on the northernmost point. Butte Basin, that's actually broken into 11 different GSAs that operate under a common agreement. So all the municipalities, the water district, reclamation districts, irrigation districts got together and said, okay, we're gonna operate under a single plan. And then we have the Wyandotte, which is, we're talking Oroville, Palermo. And so they all operate in very different ways. So here in the Vina subbasin, we are very much dependent on groundwater. 98% of our water that we use for municipality, for our gardens, and for farming comes from groundwater. When it comes to the Butte Basin, they have many more perforations into the Sacramento River, so they're able to utilize all this surface water. And so they have all these different allocations, and they shift water and irrigate using those resources. And then Wyandotte Creek, it's much more stable basin as well compared to the Vina Basin. There's just not as much agriculture going on down there. They do have some surface water coming off of the Feather. So it's all a way of saying it's part of a bigger picture. We're just kind of trying to figure out how to manage this, as Todd has illustrated, a very diverse, very complex system. So I tinkered with this slide this morning, and I think I made it worse. But all this is saying, our water report from the last year, we used about 1 million acre feet of water. An acre foot is 325 to 326,000 gallons of water. So for perspective, you can feed about 2 domestic households off an acre foot a year. Orchards use around 3.5, veggie gardens per acre, that is. Veggie gardens, 1.5, maybe 2 on the high end. And so 87% of our water, both surface water and groundwater, is used for agriculture. A lot of that is surface water, and so groundwater is about 35% of the water is used for agriculture, and of that, basically half of that is used just within the Vina Basin. So we are the key point for groundwater use for ag. So I'm going to do the review. So again, our height graph, x-axis, this is over time. This is temporal. We're starting at 2000. So we're moving over time. This is spatial. So this is, if I drop a piece of string down my well, this is the point at which I first hit water. So water high is going to be your winter months. Water low is, summer months. And so this reflects precipitation and our pumping characteristics. This is just one spot. This is just one well in our monitoring network. And so it's important to understand this is only a snapshot in what is going on in the greater picture. And this is one of the key indicators we use to determine overall aquifer health. So again, surface level is up top there. We have our water table moving down over time. Our measurable objective, this is where our landing point is hopefully at. And then down here, this is our minimum threshold. And so if 2 of our wells in our monitoring networks hit this point for 2 consecutive years, that opens the window for DWR to come in and start dictating how we can pump groundwater. And this is what's going on down south. Like, you either put a meter on your well or they use satellite data to tell you how much water you can pump. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Here, this is hydrographed straight from the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan for VINA, and we have a lot of elbow room. This plan is very permissible. So, okay, to extrapolate, so we've zoomed in. This is one single well. Now we're zooming out. What does this tell us? So each dot on the map here, that's one of those representative monitoring wells. Then from there, they've developed these polygons, and we say, okay, based on the groundwater level of this individual well, we think there's this much water in that space. There's that much fluctuation. There's that much loss in storage or gain in storage. And so before we were talking about time and elevation, we're now going to talk about time and volume. So a couple things to break down. The colored graphs in the back depict dry years and wet years. And so you'll see this graph move accordingly. And so what we're talking about here is acre feet of water. This is specific to the VINA Basin. So again, that's, Chico-Durham area. This is this area, what we think is happening over time based on those RMS wells, based on those monitoring wells. And so what we've seen from the 2000s is a strong descending trend, and then we've had some really nice wet years, and so we've been able to recoup. And so at the bottom there, you can say over time, each year we've lost about 14,000 acre feet of storage. We've lost that many gallons of water. That equates to about 4.5 billion gallons of water, to put it in context. And so this is where, if you look in the short term, we're not in bad shape, but if you look back over time, there's some questions that need to be asked. I think I'm probably getting close on time. So Wyandotte Creek, overall a very stable basin. It's very peculiar. It's kind of got these hips and valleys, and there's dry wells here, and there's perfectly good water here. It's considered a medium priority basin. But there's whole communities that are having to be put on municipal water because of dry wells at this time. So it's a bit of a conundrum. There's projects being put into place to try and move floodwaters onto recharge opportunities right now. But a very different animal, as Todd said. And then again, very different animal. We're talking about the Butte sub-basin. So that's the west side, bunch of different organizations working together to try and pull together this program. They don't have a lot of problems, but here you can see, it's a good example. In the brown columns behind the graph, we see dry years, and so in dry years, they get curtailment. Their surface water allocations are cut, and so they are more dependent on groundwater, and so you can see the groundwater reservoirs decline in response to the lack of surface water. So this kind of brings us to the concept of groundwater sustainability in the VINA Basin, because again, we're kind of like the more critical region in Butte County. We can say we can pump 233,000 acre feet of water and remain at a sustainable level. So again, we're looking at critically dry years versus wetter years, and in those dry years, we get less precipitation. We pump more in response because it's hotter, and therefore we exceed our sustainable yield. In the wet years, we get more precipitation, so we come into the year wet. We don't have to pump as much early on, and so we can attain that sustainability. And so it's a very peculiar thing, because here we are, we've had a great couple of wet years, but now we're looking and snowpack isn't so great all of a sudden. And so while water looks good right now, It's going to slowly move through the mountainside, as Todd was kind of demonstrating, and we could be a very different picture going forward. So we really do need to be looking in these like decade-long scales to even try and understand what's going on with our hydrology. And so I think I just will leave it there.
All right, I hope you don't mind. I have notes. I'm so old-fashioned. Look at this. I have index cards. Marty informed me she uses them too, but she uses bigger ones, and I wish I had known that beforehand. Okay. All right. Okay, groundwater. Okay, so we know what groundwater is. It's been covered. Anyway, where water moves down from the ground surface or the bottom of a waterway and infiltrates an underlying aquifer. Well, my focus is what have we done in the Vina Basin for recharge for these 5 years. You know, they wrote up plans. They had some different projects they were going to try out. What were they? So that's what I'm going to focus on because, you know, and then the strategies in the basin, when they go back and they evaluate them, you can see from just all of the graphs and the numbers and everything, there's a lot of information to dissect, and of those different projects that they've tried, which seem the most feasible. And those will be the ones that will get moved to the next set of plans, which will be writing a grant for the next 5 years and hopefully getting more money to further our investigation on sustainability of groundwater. Okay. And let me see. Oh, okay, so 3 methods of recharge. Okay, so natural, they have one. We'll look at one that was natural. We'll look at a couple that are enhanced or direct. And then if we have time, we'll talk very briefly about in lieu. And you can see where, like, I have one of these things too. Whoops. Okay, oh, good. So this would be your natural, and maybe your river. And then if you built a canal, that would be your enhanced. And same with a recharge basin. You know, it requires some kind of engineering, so intentional engineering. And then this injection well, we're not going to look at because that wasn't something we chose to do here in the Vina. And then you can see the aquifer down here, which, boy, after listening to Todd's talk, the aquifer, that seems like such a simple little depiction, doesn't it? Okay. Okay, so that's... Okay, so the district, or the Butte County Department of Water Resources has, they came up with 5 actions for recharge. So notice, let me skim a look, spread out and slow down flood flows and retain stormwater runoff on agricultural fields. So they have, for their source of water for some of these projects, they're looking at stormwater, the floods. You know, we've talked about atmospheric rivers. You hear about that from the weathermen, you know, at 6 o'clock news. So how to gather that water and put it back in the ground for recharge, and allowing some of it, of course, some of it has to flow out to the delta and the bays to keep those healthy. But how can we maintain some of that water and recharge our groundwater? And then they had the managing the flows in the natural channels, which will be Lindo Channel. And they have a couple of sites down in the southern part of the basin where they're going to do in lieu, or transfer of surface water. And then when people complain, they got some money associated there for all the lawyers they're going to need to answer everybody's questions about why this and why that. So each of those are lined out with how much money went. You know, they hire consultants. So these consultants come in and they've got all sorts of fancy things and chests and everything that they run, and then they report, and everybody, you know, gets knowledge that way about what's really going on. All right. Okay, so action 1, okay, I wanted to just parse this out a little bit, Because one thing with the Action 1, which is to spread out and slow down the floodwaters, is that it's not only recharge, it's flood control. And you will see that because when we get to a little map, that up around Rock Creek and the Kiefer Slough, they've had a lot of trouble with flooding. So it's hoping to do two things, recharge the aquifer and help get a handle on some of these floods. And then there's also putting water on agricultural lands, because we have a lot of agricultural lands, and it's porous, a lot of it is. They have to find out the perfect ones, but they're going to put water there. And then slow flow in the lower foothill rangeland. And I'm looking at that as probably trying to figure out how you can get some water that might slip down into the deeper aquifer. What do you think, Todd? Is that true? Maybe? Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The best underground geology for recharge: highly permeable, coarse textured sand, gravel, fractured bedrock, sedimentary rock like sandstone and limestone. And how do they find those optimal sites? Well, you've just seen a lot of studies presented by both Cheetah and Dr. Green about soil data, geology, and then they do use the AEM data, which is, I'll have a picture of it in a minute, but, and then they've gone back and looked at what has been done. They have recharge maps, there's studies, there's all sorts of stuff that goes back a couple of decades, so they've relied on that as well. And so when you talk about AEM data, there it is. So it's a helicopter, and it flies around with that big hoop, and it takes a picture of the ground going quite a ways down, and it's kind of like they call it the MRI of the Earth. So airborne electromagnetic. And then when you want to get up close and personal, you use the TTEM, which is a towed transient electromagnetic. And it's the same kind of thing, but it's on the ground, and they run an ATV up and down the rows of the trees, and they figure out which is the best place to do recharge and start digging, I guess. Anyway, okay, so after they've done all this, they found 5 waterways that's Durham Mutual Water, what is it?
It's a company.
Company, yeah. And then the Cherokee Strip down there. So this is where they said, okay, we can do some work. And so they went and they did more tests. You have to do the infiltration rate. You have to figure out what kind of recharge volume you're going to need. Well, its proximity to streams. If we're going to deal with stormwater and floodwater, then we want to have streams that will overflow and enter into into whatever your basin or your tile drain or whatever. And then the ability to distribute the water over the basin. And then most important, they have to have willing landowners, because this is all private land. So you have to go and convince a person that this is a good deal, and they have to be okay with it. All right, so 3 enhanced recharge strategies were chosen for further investigation. One was infiltration ponds or basins, and those are man-made, and they have to be, you have to scrape off the layers of soil and stuff till you get down to a permeable layer, because that's what they count on. You have to have something that's very permeable so the water will go down. And they also require maintenance, because weird things can grow, algae and stuff can grow, and then that would stop the quality of the recharge. But that's one thing. That is one. And the next one that they're looking at is reverse tile drains. And these are really interesting. You dig way down under the tree roots, and you lay that pipe, and so you capture the water on the surface, it goes down and it slips under the tree roots in this big pipe, and therefore you are able to recharge on the bottom, below the trees, but you can grow up above. And so this is a schematic, and then this is up there somewhere around Rock Creek, I'm going to assume. and then spread water onto the working agricultural land. So right there, last February, they had, let me make sure I got last February, it rained a lot. And so they picked a site off to take water off Comanche Creek. And because River Road and Old Ferry Road flood easily, and this was a trigger. It had rained at least 2 inches over 5 days, and so that was a trigger. They said, "Ooh, we could get some flooding, so let's go divert." So they went out with a pump and some screens, and they diverted that right there. They diverted it into into an orchard right next to it, and then they did the infiltration rate and all that kind of stuff. So they were able to find a place to check out that particular strategy as far as, spreading water onto agricultural land. Yes?
Would the landowner have to pay for the pumping?
No, this is covered in the money they got. But that's a good point. Okay, so recharge activity, the source of the water was going to be the excess flood water during storm events. They focused on infiltration basins and or tile drain concepts, and they they're thinking about utilizing ditches for the tile drains and activity to enhance groundwater storage as well as flood control. And that's all in the northern part of Vina. And then there's Lindo Channel, managing flows in natural channels to increase recharge. So that is really a natural recharge, okay? So what they discovered from they had all sorts of infiltration things and wells and flow meters and, everything, all sorts of equipment out there to measure how it flows. And what they discovered is that from 5 Mile up to 99, is not really, it's a lot of cement and everything. It doesn't really recharge. But after 99, they put in a couple of infiltration test sites, and they did some well owners. They got some wells in there with well owners, and they discovered that maybe, maybe we could do 72 feet per day on a 2-year flood. So, it might not be the most efficient, but it's really easy. It's there, and why not use it, even though it might not be number one. And then, so here, this is just showing where some of the gauges are and stuff. And then I'm just going to quickly go over in lieu recharge, because that was action number 4. And that's to maximize use of existing and underutilized surface water supplies. So it provides surface water to areas that customarily use groundwater. It can be implemented under any soil or geologic condition. It can be very complex and expensive, requiring construction of water conveyance facilities. It requires an agreed-upon water accounting system, and there are concerns about ownership and water rights. And with that in mind, they're looking at 2 possibilities. One is ridge to valley, convey available Paradise Irrigation District water through Butte Creek to farmland in the Vina Basin. And the other one is, and this isn't really quite correct. Anyway, it's from the Feather River to the South Vina extension, and that would transfer either Butte County Table A water or Feather River water via the Western Canal Water District through existing canals, and then you would build new pipes and canals into other fields that don't have that need those. Like right now, if you look at the yellow dots, those are already existing ditches and channels, so they'd have to add some. But that's going to be a subject for the next forum, which will go more in depth. This is just a quick little blurb about it. So that is what they've done in recharge, and they're going to be looking at it, and I don't know which ones they're going to decide are the best, but they're going to move on from there. Okay, thank you. Oh, there we go. And is Jim, you're next. Mr. Brobeck.
There's a lot of controversy about water in California. A lot of demand, a lot of unmet demand, a lot of unmet desires for water. The unimpaired runoff of the Sacramento River Basin is 21 million acre feet, but the consumptive use claims by the State Water Board is an extraordinary 120 million acre feet. Much of this water is contracted to junior water right holders that only receive water surplus to the senior water right needs. Creates these unrealistic expectations and endless demand. It's already ruined the Owens Valley. The San Joaquin Valley's been drained, and there's huge demand for Sacramento River water in the San Joaquin Valley. Carrying capacity is in the context of water supply refers to the maximum amount of water that an environment can sustainably provide to support a population and ecosystems. In the San Joaquin Basin, deep wells depressurized the lower aquifer. Over time, the upper water table of the aquifer system that sustained native trees and streams leaked downward into the lower aquifer, extirpating all the valley oak trees, draining the creeks that came out of the Sierra. Here's some quotes. You can read them. These are from a 1997 CalFed evaluation of the Butte Basin groundwater resources. They plan to use the Tuscan Aquifer as a state water bank. CalFed was a collaboration between federal and California state water managers to manage the delta. For 30 years, the agencies continue to view the Tuscan Aquifer as an underutilized source of water to be manipulated like the surface reservoirs. Drain them and then recharge them. The resource agencies are willing to intentionally overdraft our regional groundwater during dry years or a series of dry years in hopes of refilling the deep pressurized aquifer at a later time via experimental recharge efforts. In 2011, DWR gave a presentation at the California Water Commission. And this is one of the slides that was put forth by Mr. Hauge, who was one of the lead DWR people. He considered charged aquifers in the Butte Basin to be an impediment to water banking. And they recommended intentional overdraft during dry years to send river water south. While Butte County has an ordinance that forestalls groundwater substitution water transfer sales, doesn't prohibit them, it just slows them down. Senior irrigation districts in adjacent counties that overlie the shared aquifer continue to implement groundwater substitution using the Tuscan Aquifer, where water goes south and water comes out of the ground to continue growing the rice. Expansion of groundwater-dependent orchards and groundwater substitution water transfer sales has created persistent depletion of water in the deep aquifer west of the Vina subbasin. This DWR map shows the deep aquifer in Glenn County has declined well over 40 feet, possibly as much as 80 feet, resulting in dewatered domestic wells and alarming well levels of land subsidence. Here's the west side of the valley. Here's Chico, by the way, and it looks to me like the echoes of this decline are pointing right at Chico. Reports of damaged building foundations in Glenn County and sinkholes show how that when the deep aquifer is depressurized, it isn't just groundwater-dependent ecosystems that experience undesirable results. In 2011, the Glen Calouse Irrigation District and the Natural Heritage Institute produced a study funded by the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation. It describes how the lower Tuscan Aquifer could be tapped to increase Central Valley system-wide water supply through participation in the emerging groundwater substitution marketplace. The report recognized that most of the groundwater goes into the deep aquifer, where the Tuscan Formation surfaces along the eastern foothills of the valley. They recommended in this study an aquifer management regime in which the recharge occurs at the eastern margin and pumping would occur in production wells in Glenn and Colusa counties. The report says, quote, if the aquifer is depressurized in the deeper zones of the aquifer system due to the extraction of large volumes of groundwater from deep wells, then eventually the water would come out of storage in the recharge area, thereby reducing groundwater levels, unquote. And then the report goes on to say, quote, the Lower Tuscan Formation, if integrated into California's water supply system, could provide major water supply reliability benefits. It will take decades before we know enough about the aquifer dynamics to devise a risk-free regime, and yet it would be foolish to require that the aquifer remained an underperforming asset in the interim. When SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, was passed in 2014, I hoped that the Northern Sacramento Valley could prevent the disastrous results of unfettered groundwater exploitation that created subsidence, stream and domestic well dewatering, and native vegetation extirpation in the Owens Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. I engaged in the planning process that created the VINA GSP. It was appointed by the VINA board to represent the environmental community on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, known as the SHAC. I attended every SHAC meeting. I attended every VINA board meeting. I lobbied for groundwater levels adequate to support municipal, agricultural, and domestic use and assure the vitality of streams and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. The final plan was composed by Department of Water Resources funded consultants. It fell short of that goal. 5 of the 10 advisory committee members published their serious concerns that the plan allows major groundwater fluctuations. It could cause irreversible damage to groundwater-dependent ecosystems, including the Chico urban forest, and would result in dewatered domestic wells. The dissenting opinion also raised the issue of aquifer privatization associated with these experimental conjunctive use recharge programs. This hydrograph of a monitoring well in the VINA Subbasin North Management Area reveals a water banking operational range that illustrates our concerns. The oscillating blue line shows the high spring and low fall aquifer level measurements from 1965 to 2021. The green line, the measurement objective, is 27 feet below the ground surface, the approximate historic low of this oscillating line. The solid blue line at the bottom designates the allowed minimum aquifer level, called the minimum threshold level, at 107 feet below ground surface. The plan explains that if groundwater levels drop below that minimum threshold for 2 consecutive years, there might be some undesirable results. The vertical red line is the proposed operating range that would allow conjunctive use water banking in the aquifer. The red dot is the optimum water level depth for valley oak trees, about 33 feet. The green dot at 80 feet shows the absolute maximum taproot level for both valley oak trees and blue oak trees. The trees in the Chico urban forest that are thriving at current levels probably don't go down 80 feet, but they don't need to be watered once they're established if they're the right species of trees. The VINA GSP, I think, is a Trojan horse that claims local control of groundwater, but the plan ignored the input from environmentalists concerned about GDEs. It ignored domestic well owners worried about dry wells. It ignored real estate managers concerned about property values if the aquifer is depleted, and ignored warnings expressed by Professor Green, representing the California State University on the SHAC. As I see it, the plan lays out a blueprint for water marketing conjunctive water use The VINA GSP allows operating the Tuscan aquifer at levels that are over 80 feet, over 200% below the historic low. And it includes an experimental in-lieu recharge project that funds the expansion of water district canals to bank water in the empty water table. The California Department of Resources has a history of mismanaged infrastructure and unrealistic supply promises. In 2017, DWR lost control of the Oroville Dam, resulting in destruction of the spillway. Repairing the spillways in Oro Dam cost the public at least $1.1 billion. The long-lasting water quality impacts to the Feather River and beyond include the deposit of over 1 million cubic yards of asbestos-laden debris from the pulverized green schist bedrock. The state goal of so-called sustainable groundwater market would sacrifice the public trust to satisfy the economic goals of those with the strongest voices, the most money, the most political power. But I think we should engage in the GSP revision process this year to raise the measurable objectives for the purpose of improving the overall conditions. We shouldn't satisfy with the objective being the low, the historic low. We need to raise the minimum threshold to have an ecological threshold. It'll protect the environment, it'll protect domestic well owners. Right now, the only groundwater-dependent vegetation that's being protected is right along the creeks. We need to recognize that Valley Oak woodlands, even up to miles away from the creek, are tapping the groundwater. And the Chico urban forest, even though it's not right by the creek, is a groundwater-dependent ecosystem. We need to get rid of the minimum threshold designation that allows 2 years of extreme aquifer depletion. Furthermore, I think we should challenge the state water market that uses the aquifer in groundwater substitution water sales that's occurring on the other side of the river. We need to urge the State Water Resources Control Board to revise this paper water contracts that drive these unrealistic water expectations by junior water rights holders south of the Delta. How am I doing on time? Done? Thank you.
In the fall, so from October to November, the Department of Water Resources held a series of stakeholder meetings, and there were 4 groups that they formed. The local expert group, called the LEG, environmental representatives, domestic well users, and agricultural users. And the goal was to present the same technical material to each group and gather early input. Okay, so what was presented to stakeholders? Updates on domestic well inventory, refinement of representative monitoring sites, options for setting minimum thresholds, or the MTs. So option 1 was recalculate the minimum threshold, and if you remember, it's the lowest one, the one that, 2 years, bad things can happen, and probably would before. All right, so recalculate the MTs using updated domestic well inventory and revised RMS polygons. And option 2, set the minimum threshold based on historical minimum groundwater levels minus an agreed upon buffer. So the MT would come up significantly to the lowest historical low, and then you could lower it a little bit, maybe by a percentage that you would decide, but that wouldn't be like so much. It would come up quite a bit. Okay, so the local expert group, the key messages were the RMS wells must represent shallow domestic well conditions. They must consider the MTs based on historical lows with a buffer. That's option 2. Clarify GSA's role in domestic well mitigation. And significant data gaps remain for interconnected surface water, or ISW, conditions. All right, so that was the local expert group. Okay, the environmental group. Current MTs are too low to protect the GDEs, the urban forests, and the valley oaks. Use ecological thresholds as part of the MT setting. Expand the GDE, or the groundwater dependent ecosystem mapping, to include urban canopy and oak woodlands. So that would be part of our forest. That's, our urban forest. And support broader integrated stakeholder discussion. So that group as well was, the MTs are too low. Okay, so domestic well users. Enhancing the RMS network, evaluating both options 1 and 2 to set the SMCs. Oh, I forget what SMC stands for. What is it? Okay, thanks. A strong concern that the current MTs do not protect domestic wells. Okay. And they want triggers and early warnings before MTs are reached, and they have strong support for developing a well mitigation program. Agricultural users, key messages. All changes should be data-driven, need clarity on why RMS changes are needed, concerns about economic impacts of MT changes, want flexibility in setting MTs until more data gaps are filled, need clarity on mitigation program purpose, scope, and funding. So, okay, and then Butte County's vision described in the department's strategic plan is to ensure an abundant and sustainable water supply to support all uses in Butte County and ensure that local water resources are protected to meet local water needs. Okay, so what happened, so what happened was, so they had the information from the 4 groups, and the shack itself, the stakeholder advisory committee had also weighed in and thought they wanted to look at the MTs using option 1 and 2. So jump ahead to the VINA and the RCRD joint meeting. So that stands for, it's the Rock Creek Reclamation District. Whew. And it's a little tiny district. And then there's the VINA. It's a really big district. Okay, so they had a joint meeting in December, and all of a sudden there was an option 3 there was option 1, option 2, and there was an option 3 that had been put there, which had not been presented in the meetings to the stakeholder groups. Option 3 was just to retain the current MTs. And we said, wait a minute. And the feedback from 4 out of the 5 stakeholder meetings was largely ignored. Options 1 and 2 received little attention, and option 3, heretofore not presented or discussed, was slipped in and advanced. And this lack of transparency contributes to an erosion of trust with the stakeholders. SGMA requires sustainability for all beneficial users, but that requires good faith communication by all concerned. So that was just something that we thought as a group kind of let you know that are the environment and the well owners really, do we have that place at the table? And with the next round that's coming up, we want to be there. We want to put our 2 cents in and have it respected and listened to and acted upon. So, Marty, do you want to close us out? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all the presenters. So I just want to remind you, the purpose of this forum is actually to provide as many facts as possible about our 3 subbasins and also about SGMA. But most importantly is that the amendments are coming up and due in January of 2027, and we want to be sure that the stakeholders, which you've heard multiple times, which is very broad, have an opportunity to provide input into the amendments to the GSPs. And so that is really the purpose of this forum as well as the second forum. I want to thank the presenters for their information. So let's give them a round of applause.
I want to make one comment. Is this on? Oh, yeah, good. The buffer that was recommended for setting the minimum threshold, if you see the blue line going up and down, what's been suggested is you move that blue line down to the green line. And it's a much less oscillation that is allowed in the operational range. And our suggestion is to have the minimum threshold be below the measurable objective. I'll point it out. So move this down to here, so you have this much. So this line would be here. Of the range of the valley oak trees. It would probably keep it in the range of most of Chico's urban forest. Now, if we do move it down, even at this level, we do have some loss in creek flow. When I first moved to Chico, back around this era, Big Chico Creek never went dry. But now, when we hit these low levels, and even around in here, Big Chico Creek goes underground in certain areas, like going through campus. It didn't used to do that. And at the groundwater level, if the deep aquifer, the pressurized aquifer, maintains its pressure, it holds up the water table. When Todd was showing you the pictures of the lower Tuscan going up and down, now the confining layer was much lower than what was shown, but if they put a hole in the ground, a well, then the pressure pushes it up into whatever tube if you drilled a well. So that's why that line went up and down above where the confining layer was. And it does leak upward through fissures and holds up the shallow aquifer. And one concern I have is that most of these recharge projects would have an impact on the shallow aquifer, which is helpful, but it's not going to leak down rapidly enough into the lower Tuscan, into the pressurized aquifer, which is recharged up in the upgradient portion of the Tuscan outcroppings. And that is the aquifer that is the primary aquifer that's being evacuated by the biggest pumps in the Tuscan aquifer.
Thanks, Jim.
Should I do my recommendations?
Go.
Yep. So I've got a few recommendations. As Jim has already said, change the MOs and MTs, those measurable objectives, and our minimum thresholds all need to be higher. I also would like to see better representation on the VINA GSA. And to give voting power to tribal representatives with the Machuta tribe. Right now they are observation only, and they have to provide in-kind staff time. So they have to pay their staff to go sit there and observe, but they can't vote on any decision making. So I would change that. I would also give a seat to environmental representative and a representative for small farmers. Small farmers are defined by USDA as making $350,000 or less or owning 50 acres or less. And I think that right now the only representative on the VINA GSA is really representative for industrial agriculture. My other recommendation would be to actually create a mitigation plan for when undesirable results occur, to protect domestic well users, to protect the increased liability, assets, etc., for when those undesirable results occur, like our wells going dry, our urban forests dropping tree limbs on homes and cars and people. All of that needs to be mitigated and thought about. I would also change the meeting times of current Vine GSA, Tuscan Water District, DWR. All of those meetings start at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. And most of our community members are working folks, and I sure can't make those meetings. And so how do you expect to get public input if you can't attend the meeting? I would also lay out the methodology for how exactly we plan to implement and integrate stakeholder feedback. They've sure collected it. They sure have not changed anything. So what does it take to actually change anything? 4 of those expert groups said we need to change stuff, and that didn't happen. So how exactly do you integrate our feedback? Because I'm not seeing it done. And then there's the thing about water exports, but I think that's maybe best for another time.
Well, as typical of being last in line about recommendations, a lot of the recommendations that I would make have already been said. So that's, I've been a strong advocate of changing the MTs and the MOs since before the plan was implemented. I don't know if you want me to agree with all of it. I agree with a lot that's been said, with better representation on the board. I think the board is stacked against you all in many ways, and it's unfortunate. You feel a little useless on the shack sometimes when the board doesn't listen to you on major issues. I feel there's so much that's been said that also I agree with that. So representation is a good one. In terms of the GDEs, not just being restricted to riparian or areas that are adjacent to creeks, Jim already mentioned this, but I would reiterate, it's not just about the GDEs that are next to creeks. You gotta look at GDEs between creeks as well. And that means knowing where the water table is, which means having a good shallow aquifer network. That's one of the, I think that was pointed out, this is nothing new, but it really needs to be improved from what it is, because you're not going to know where the water tables are, or how it's changing, unless you have that good shallow water monitoring network. I think another, again, the interbasin communication needs to be improved, and some of this is already happening, but having the west side of Vina talk to the east side of Colusa and Corning, and coming to having better communication about what groundwater models they're using. And this is nothing new again. This is happening. It's just we haven't quite seen the results of it yet. So I think that's important to not just think about Vina or Butte or Wyandotte, but what is happening on the other side of on the other side of the river. I think, again, another thing that needs to be improved from the GSP that's happening, sort of, is the better domestic well database. Again, it's happening, and there's things that are going on, but it's still something that needs to be improved, because that's what is used a lot in the establishing MOs and MTs in the current method that they have. But I will reiterate that that's not really, I don't really like that method of establishing how many domestic wells will go dry if you drop the groundwater levels to a certain, sometimes that's called the inflection point method, or there's different names for it. I tend to agree with Jim that having a defined buffer below the historic lows is a good way to go. But the domestic wells are that whole framework of trying to understand where the domestic wells are, how deep they are, and just improving that database. It needs to happen, and it has happened. has been improved, but that continuing effort needs to keep going. That's a lot. I think I covered it, so.
Yeah, no, I think that segues exactly kind of into what I was thinking is, I think GDEs, domestic well users, and agricultural users are collectively left unprotected under the standard GSP as it is now. So there's a cool website, sigmareview.org, and it's got these really cool heat maps that shows kind of unprotected GDEs, unprotected domestic wells, and kind of plots these wells along there. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand, like, the question has been put to me, why are the minimum thresholds at the level that they are at? And so it's structured in that they've examined the wells drilled after 1980, and they kind of plot a line along that, and then with the assumption that some of them were unsustainably constructed, drilled too shallow when they were initially constructed, which I don't know why you finish a well without hitting water. And also a possibility that the wellhead was at a higher elevation than those RMS wells, so they didn't have to drill as deep, I guess, to hit water in that particular region, say it was upslope from the representative well. And under the current structure, still, and this is from talking with consultants, about 20% of the wells in that polygon will go dry by the time you hit the minimum threshold. So they're trying to backfill now and using AI to search before 1980, because well reports before 1977 are incredibly hard to search. Like, especially in Chico, there's no road names. Everything is just kind of like, you spit past that left bush and then you drill the well there, and that's the information we have to go on. So it's really hard to kind of pinpoint some of these older wells. And, you know, the part of my job that I really enjoy is that I'm going to these farms, and we have these, you know, farmers moving onto land. They have no idea what's going on in the well. It's clearly drilled before 1977. It's really still functional. So there's no reason to exclude these wells. But they're, you know, 150 feet deep. These are very shallow wells in the valley. And they've been refurbished, reconstructed, pumped and pulled, new pump put in, variable speed pumps. And these people, any well casing, that is the pipe that sits at the top of the well, larger than 6 inch, is not considered in the GSP at all. So agricultural factor, like the whole sector of ag, is not included in the GSP as it's structured now. So I think we all kind of have a dog in the fight when it comes to this. And you know, the minimum threshold is set at a level that we could raise it, you know, just give us a little bit of love, and we're not sacrificing the bigger farmers that are drilled down to 300 feet. We're not, you know, mismanaging our aquifer to set a higher standard for ourselves. You know, I hear this, like, we want to get the best GSP around, and we have that opportunity, and we can move the needle.
Thank you all for sharing your perspective. Susan, if you want to come up here, because you may have questions for yourself as well, so if you want to come up and join the group. As always, I think we all know how time goes by, and so thank you. Am I supposed to do something with that?
No.
If they're answering.
Okay. So I wanted to read something to you, and it has to do with Sigma and the citizens of California. In 1928, the state of California modified its constitution that all water, surface and or groundwater, is to be used reasonably and beneficially and conserved for the citizens of the state. State officials, and by extension, all public officials, including water districts, carry the responsibility as trustees to conserve the water for the citizens. With the passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014, laws were put into place to ensure the protection of the state's groundwater. The Sigma regulations are to conserve the groundwater for the citizens and the ecosystems dependent on this water. Sigma does not give public officials and their agents unfettered authority to do as they will with California's groundwater. The public needs to participate with providing a voice in the planning and identification of water projects to conserve groundwater and in setting local water policy. With awareness of how most aquifer systems have been depleted throughout much of California, the United States, and throughout the world, caution ought to be the guiding principle when pursuing water projects. To paraphrase the words of water policy expert and author of Blue Covenant, Maud Barlow, if you take water from an area with a healthy water system and transfer it to an area deplete of a healthy water system, you will create 2 deserts. So with that, I'm going to, thank you, open it up to questions. And I'm going to give this, you give me those, that's going to be the first question. I'll take those.
Yeah, they're all about MTs, Marty.
Okay, that's good. That's why I wanted to get them so I could group them. And because we are running out of time and people might need to leave, I wanted to remind you that we will be having another water forum with a focus on reducing demand 2 weeks from tonight, same place, same location, same time. We are recording these forums, and they will be on YouTube, and they'll be on the Groundwater for Butte and Beck websites. And we have also developed a handout that has that statement that I just read, but it's how the public can get involved. And so it will be at the front as people are leaving. If you're interested in wanting to find out different ways to get involved, this will give you some information about that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to look at these cards.
Okay, so the first question is for Todd Green, and the question is, when water is applied to the surface of the ground, how deep will it penetrate?
Yeah, hard to answer. I can't give you a number, but it totally depends on the geology of are there quartz materials there? Is there a layer that's preventing it from going deeper? So I can't give you a number, and it depends where you are. However, there is a risk, as it was mentioned earlier, when you're doing recharge projects, that water that you supposedly are, bringing into the aquifer may just reach down a certain level and then travel horizontally, more or less, and hit the next creek. So you're taking it from a creek, putting it down, and then it hits the next creek system. That is a very plausible scenario that could happen. Again, it depends on the layering, it depends on the geology. So it's something that can be monitored if you have those shallow monitoring networks. But it's a big caveat for recharge projects. Are you just taking it from one creek and putting it into the next creek, or are you actually putting it in the aquifer system? Sorry, I don't have a number.
I think I'm going to try to summarize these. Hold that one. So, as Susan mentioned, a lot of the questions have to do with the MTs and the MOs. And one of the questions is, what or who are the obstacles in achieving the changes to these 2 criteria within the GSP? Who would like to address that?
Mr. Brobeck.
Do you? She's got it.
We need a better informed board, a well-informed stakeholder, and we can't let DWR-funded consultants formulate the plan. So we need a strong board that's going to protect the public trust and not rely, as we have in the past, on consultants that are experts, but I think they've got some different goals in mind than we do.
The board.
GSA board.
Okay.
Another question, this is for whoever wants it, is when using agriculture land for recharge, how much of a problem is pesticides and fertilizers getting into the groundwater? Great question. So again, how likely is it that pesticides and fertilizers will get into the groundwater if you use agricultural land for recharge?
That should go to Cheetah, because he works with farmers.
This came up in one of the Tuscan Water District meetings, where in a different region they were using surface water for recharge, and they did have to implement a domestic well monitoring system to ensure that, we call it like chemical trespass in the industry isn't occurring onto people's domestic wells. So yeah, I mean, that'd be something to look, I mean, PID water, Paradise Irrigation District, you know, it's relatively clean water, but, you know, we're going to be introducing a volume of water into a community with very, you know, shallow domestic wells. I mean, Riparia's right there. They've got that well pumping out of it. Sierra Nevada has rights to that creek. They pump straight out of it, things like that.
This is pretty similar.
Okay. What is in place to prevent contamination of the aquifer with recharge? What is in place to protect that?
Make one comment. Up until about 2 weeks ago, I thought that injecting water through wells by pushing it into the aquifer was off the table. And I haven't heard of any in Butte County, but in Tehama County, they are considering one injection well. And the way they'll protect contaminating the deeper aquifer from biological contamination is treating the water with chlorine. And a geologist that I talked to said that that's problematic because if you introduce chlorine into the deep water, Todd, I don't know if you know about this, but that it can diminish the ability of the ground to actually move water. So bad idea. Injection well, really expensive. Contamination, yeah. It's not a good idea. We need natural recharge in the foothills to recharge the lower Tuscan aquifer.
Anything else to add?
No, but no, that's, yeah, you can increase, you can change the salinity for sure. And that does affect the density of the water if you do that, and it does affect the movement. More likely vertical movement due to density differences. But yeah, that is an issue, and it'll change the quality of the water. A lot of the other ions floating around with it, and they'll like the sodium, they'll take to chlorine, and you get salts and so forth. So yeah, it sounds like an engineering solution that is wrought with problems.
I'm going to just put out the last two questions. One is who specifically decides the minimum threshold? And that is probably, I mean, basically it is the VINA GSA board taking feedback from the shack, which we've heard was not always considered. And of course, we've heard some of the concerns about the composition of the board. But the other was, what are the differences between the three options? Do any of you want to just address the three options that were put out for changing the minimum threshold?
Oh, gosh. Oh, let me see. Okay, so the first one was the historic low with a buffer. And then the next one was to gather the data from the new domestic well data and the RMS wells and figure out what was going on there. And then some people said, well, let's do 1 and 2 and see which one, see how they compare and are they compatible. And then the third one was just to leave it as it was, which is very, very low, which was the surprise.
And that was the one that was selected?
That was the one that was selected. It was like, oh, okay, that by the board.
No,
By
it wasn't.
That doesn't sound right.
the third one?
It was direction given on all of the options. No decision has been made on any of the options. It was, staff was asking for direction if there was a preferred option, and all of the options are being looked at. No decision was made at that board meeting.
Good.
Well, good.
Thanks for that clarification,
That's good
Cami.
news.
And so is the board looking at that, or who's looking at those?
We're looking at all of the options to bring back for decisions.
All right. Do you know when that might happen?
April to August.
Okay, and that's during the GSP amendment review time. Great. So the last question has my name on it. It has to do with the concept of ecological thresholds. And basically what happened here is that the state Audubon group and TNC received a grant from DWR to review the GSPs that have been set for the 142 subbasins that have GSPs, to review those plans in relationship to the protection for groundwater-dependent ecosystems. And so in doing this, they then provided assistance to subbasins who requested to have someone come in from those two groups to, kind of work through the process with them. And as they did their review of all the GSPs, they realized that having an ecological threshold was probably the smartest thing to do for a subbasin so that they were protecting their urban forests, their trees, their groundwater-dependent ecosystems, as well as the domestic wells. And what else is there? Well, the part of the GDEs. Small farmers, that there was a large constituent group, including birds and fish, the habitat for these ecosystems that needed protection. And so they came up with this concept called the ecological threshold. And that really took well with people locally because it made a lot of sense. And so that is something that we will continue to put forward. I wanted to just mention that next forum, in addition to looking at different ways to reduce demand of groundwater, that we will be looking closely at the ways that the GSPs can be modified to accommodate a lot of the concerns that have been mentioned tonight by our presenters. So thank you for coming, and let's give our people another hand. We've got some handouts over here from Beck. We've got some handouts over here from the Department of Water Resources and Conservation. There's some handouts from Aqua Alliance. And we also have the handout as you leave about different ways that you can get involved. So
Make sure you take all of that.
I guess that's it. So thank you for coming.